Welcome. We're glad you're joining us for today's webinar. St. John Baptist de La Salle, patron saint of educators and founder of the Brothers, encouraged the early brothers to see their faith formation and ministry as one. Today, we'll explore how the lens of theological reflection can strengthen the spirituality of each of us as Lasallian educators. My name is Chris Swain, and I'm happy to host this webinar from Christian Brothers Conference, the office of the Lasallian region of North America. Also joining me behind the scenes is Sarah Layton, Director of Education and Formation. We're grateful you're taking the time out of your full schedules to join us. It's a blessing to have Lasallians joining us from across the country and internationally as well. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. The chat section of the Zoom is open. We encourage you to leave your comments there throughout the session and chat with one another. You can leave questions and answers in that section of the Zoom, and one of Brother Michael will attend to responding to them during the session. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on our Lasallian Resource Center website, lasallianresources.org. We'll provide you a copy via email you provided at registration when the video link becomes available. We're grateful to have with us to share and facilitate this session, Brother Michael French and Brother Michael Phipps. Brother Michael French is the 9th of 10 children of Agnes and Lorenzo French. He learned his spirituality from them on the farm where he grew up in northern Minnesota. Brother Michael joined the brothers, encouraged by his older brother, Paul French, now deceased, who was a De La Salle brother for more than 60 years, who helped him discern his vocational choice. Brother Michael has master's degrees in Spanish from St. Mary's University, Minnesota, pastoral studies from Loyola University in Chicago, and a doctorate in cross-cultural ministry from the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. In his 52 years with the brothers, he's moved from his novitiate in Windsor, Ontario, to suburban Chicago, to Guatemala, to Chicago, to Rome, where he lived and worked in adult formation for 16 years, and finally back to Chicago, where he continues to minister. Besides doing time in formation in Guatemala, Italy, Brother Michael has also had the opportunity to do workshops, facilitations, liturgy or retreats in England, Spain, as well as several African, Asian, and Latin American countries. He worked in Loyola's Hispanic Institute for several years, and a high point was his 16-year time working in Salle in Rome. His present ministry includes formation, retreats, consultation, group facilitation within and outside our Lasallian world, both locally and internationally. We're also grateful to have with us Brother Michael Phipps, an annually vowed member of the Brothers of the Christian Schools with the Midwest District, currently ministers as a school counselor at Cretin-Durham Hall in St. Paul, Minnesota. He also serves as a spirituality project manager for the Lasallian region of North America. Brother Michael first met the De La Salle Christian Brothers at LaSalle High School in Yakima, Washington. Encountering the brothers as teachers, administrators, and models of spiritual maturity, the foundation set at LaSalle led him to initial formation with the Institute. Brother Michael accompanies people in integrating the physical, spiritual, social, and emotional aspects of their lives. He holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Northern Colorado and a master's of arts in school counseling and guidance from Lewis University. With over a decade of experience in supporting young people, Brother Michael specializes in walking with people experiencing anxiety, depression, and the journey of grief. In his downtime, Brother Michael enjoys exploring spirituality through dance and movement, spending time in nature, and following college volleyball. Brothers, welcome. Thank you in advance, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Brother Michael and I are excited to be with you all. As we begin, let us take a moment and remember that we are in the holy presence of God. Throughout our time together, our goal is to define and provide context for the concept of theological reflection and its constitutive elements, explain two models of theological reflection, and frame the practice of theological reflection in our Lasallian charism. Brother Michael and I recognize that our conversation today is by no means the final word or even the first word on this topic. Our hope is that this will be the start of an ever-deepening integration of theological reflection into Lasallian spirituality. The agenda on screen provides an outline of the flow for the webinar. Alongside the content we present will be opportunities for participant reflection and engagement. As Chris mentioned, we invite you to drop questions and comments into the chat as we go along. Brother Michael and I will try our best to answer all questions. Brother Michael, let's jump into the contextualization of theology for the purpose of our session.
Good evening, everyone. It's, at least here in Chicago, it's evening. It's wonderful to be together. As we gather, I have already heard from several people that said, how is theological reflection related to me? I'm not a trained theologian. And yet I think as we move through, that all of us are called by Pope Francis recently to be missionary disciples. And that means automatically that we have a theological word to give, that we are providing some kind of theological insight to our disciples, as Salle referred to to our students as disciples. So I'm going to start with a text that you see on the screen. It's not a complete text. It's from the Rule of 2015. But I think it will set us up because it provides a number of very keen insights, and the movement in the text itself will be helpful for us. And it says, and I read, deeply moved by the human and spiritual distress of the children of artisans and the poor, and in response to the call of God, John Baptist de La Salle and his first brothers made a lifelong commitment to God to provide these children with a human and Christian education, and so extend the glory of God on earth. They reformed the kind of schooling available at the time to make it accessible to the poor and to offer it to all as a sign of the reign of God and as a means of salvation. Interesting to note, and this will be that we will follow throughout. Noticed, he became aware of what was happening in Reims and later in Paris and other cities. So he became aware of this distress of the children of the artisans and the poor. So we're talking about specific people. And what did he do? With his first brothers, he made a lifelong commitment to God. So an ongoing process with them, they engaged in a communal reflection and decided what was needed was a reformed educational system. So they produced something, an action, as a result of their reflection because they were aware of an issue. And so I think that's something we can think of throughout this presentation as something that is already very Lasallian. Awareness of what's going on, gathering together our resources in a continuing process that's going to produce some kind of an action. And why do I include this? Because you can see that De La Salle from the beginning took his teachers seriously. He believed that they were able to do what we would call theological reflection. And he recognized that they would need to continue to do it throughout their lives. Let's move on to, I think, perhaps one of the most common statements about what theology is. St. Anselm of Canterbury was a Benedictine monk, a philosopher, and a theologian at the end of the 11th and the beginning of the 12th centuries. So a very interesting time to be alive in Britain. It was right after the invasion of the Normans. He suggests this as a statement. He is credited with having saying, theology is faith-seeking understanding. And it's important because at that time, which was called the Age of Faith, faith was the be-all and end-all of everything. And what's interesting here is that Anselm takes reason seriously. Reason as a human activity, an intellectual activity. And he puts it in dialogue with faith, not over and against, not better than or worse than, but he creates a dialogue with them. And so I think what we might take away from this is that this refers to the possibility that faith is a conversation partner with us. So faith for him was the starting point, but it wasn't the only point. It was to lead to a deeper understanding and a deeper pursuit of knowledge and understanding in Christian theology. So this continues to be relevant for us today because we also need to encourage Christians like ourselves to engage in critical thinking and intellectual exploration of their faith, but not all, as we will see.
Thank you, brother, for this initial contextualization of theology. In a moment, we will move to defining theological reflection. For now, we invite you to take a minute or two to reflect internally on the spirit in which you enter into our time together. How are you feeling? What questions may you have? What do you hope to gain from our time together? At this point, I invite Brother Michael to walk us through defining and describing theological reflection.
Thank you, Michael. As I stated earlier on, theological reflection is a process through which human experience meets in dialogue with faith, or if you prefer, with religious tradition. So it's basically about dialogue and communion. How do we make sense of what's happening in our lives? How do we use the resources that we have, and what resources do we have at our disposal? From ancient times, there has been some process of reflection in the Christian churches, and we see that although it wasn't called theological reflection, Christians have been dealing with meaning making throughout the existence of the church, whatever issues they have faced. So when we come together to talk about theological reflection, we're talking about a discipline, because I think theological reflection is also a discipline, which is only about 40 years old. So how do we find meaning? By connecting God's experience to what the God experience or understanding of it in the world. So this is spiritual praxis, but it also is, as you see, a little bit with echoes of Anselm. It says critical thinking and asking questions and analyzing events through the lens of faith. So theological reflection evolved both what is called model and method. Now, we will be presenting several models. And for lack of a better explanation, I'm going to say that a model is sort of like a recipe, as you will see a couple of them as we present. And method is kind of like when you take that basic recipe, how do you put it together? How do you make it sense? How do you kind of sort things out? And in order to do that, I think we're going to have to talk about this Venn diagram. As you see, there's experience, there's also religious tradition, and that piece in the middle, that's where the reflection happens. That's where theological reflection happens, where the two come together and interpenetrate, if you will, each other and challenge each other and perhaps respond to each other. So the model I have up here is one of the many of a variety of models. This one is borrowed loosely from James and Evelyn Whitehead, who wrote a book on theological reflection as a kind of a source for ministry. But these elements we're going to be talking about here are common to many of the theological reflection models which we will experience or that you might want to explore. But of course, you notice here it is a dialogue. We'll mention kind of the three elements of the dialogue, but what's in the middle is you, because you share all of these, and each one of you is unique in your human experience, in your culture, and in your religion. If you think about what human experience, it comes, it depends on whose experience is important. In contemporary circles, more and more, the idea of those whose voices are not heard or whose experience is not taken into account. And we can think of many different examples. And if we move into religious tradition, there is scripture, there are religious prayer practices or liturgical practices. There may be popular expressions. And then culture, of course, this is huge. You could fill pages and pages of your own understanding of culture, what it brings, language, customs, attitudes, and so on and so on. And what happens is, if you'll notice in this, that's what I like about the Venn diagram, is that they overlap. And so your human experience and your religious tradition might be quite different, or they might be quite similar. In some countries, the human experience and the religious tradition are practically identical. But the same might be true of the culture and the religious tradition. Think of all Christian or all Catholic countries. Your human experience within a culture and within religious tradition makes you unique. But you will find, as the more you read, that most of the models of theological reflection embrace some aspect of these three families that we're talking about. Michael? Okay, so what gets included in this theological reflection? So far, it's a nice idea, but what does it look like? I'm going to use a word here that is maybe not familiar with people. It is habitus. And habitus is a word that sort of sounds fancy and maybe even theological, Latin, etc. But actually, it comes from a French sociologist. And basically, what it means is the things that you have in common that help you make decisions. And everyone has one. So you've got one. As we're sitting here right now, you have your own habitus. In theological terms, we could say that it refers to those deeply ingrained dispositions, values, and practices that shape who you are. if you remember the Venn diagram, they become what is called second nature. And they are going to determine how you act, how you respond, what kind of decisions you make. And they come from formation. So the habitus comes from our formation right from the first time. So when you think of yourself as a child, with your family, within the culture, within religious experience, and with that experience, and then every time you move into a new kind of a new social circle or a new cultural circle, that expands. Think of, for example, when you joined some aspect of Lasallian living. That started to become part of your habitus. And your habitus is something that you add to every day. These internal structures, you might call, become embodied. They become what is kind of second nature or muscle memory. To give perhaps a helpful comparison, think of those of you who play sports. When somebody throws you a ball, you don't say, no, there's a ball coming at me very quickly. I have to put my hands out and grasp it. No, you have a muscle memory because you've learned this over time. And you keep adding to this as you grow on. And these new ideas and practices become part of you. Think of the kinds of things you've learned since you've become a Lasallian. And so our theological reflection is a way of referring to these many different things, many variety of things that we have learned and that we have internalized that have become second nature to us. So this habitus that I'm talking about, it looks like a fancy word, but think of it as where you go to the things that you count on that you can trust within your own being. So it's a sociological term. Pierre Bourdieu, the system of dispositions. So it's those ingrained things that I was talking about. And they shape the way you behave, but it also shapes the way groups behave. You may have had the experience sometime of saying, I knew this was a Lasallian school as soon as I walked in. There was something I could sense because your habitus shows. It is embodied in your actions. So just as LaSalle's worked together with those early brothers produced actions that you could identify. Now, so when we're talking about theological reflection, what are the goals of it? Why do you do it? Well, some authors suggest that it helps you to make spiritual sense of a situation. It doesn't just happen. There's a spiritual message there. And the second thing is to determine how you respond to a situation, as the founder did with those early teachers and brothers. So how do we make sense of our experience? What practices and what resources do we draw on? And what it informs our reflection and moves us towards a response.
Well, thank you, brother, for the insights on the ins and outs of the theological reflection, and specifically on the concept, the idea of habitus. For now, we're going to offer a time of reflection, and we want you to think about your experience, your Lasallian journey in spirituality, in ministry, and in the chat, we would ask you to drop down any words or phrases that you feel you believe form our Lasallian habitus. So we'll take a few minutes to allow each of you to do that. Again, habitus being, great, thank you, Brother Brian. Habitus being those things that stay with us, right? That are ingrained, that, as Brother Michael said, become muscle memory. They're almost automatic as we are in situations, joyful situations, challenging situations. We would encourage you to continue to think about and reflect on what makes up your habitus, both you individually, but also the way that it engages with the Lasallian mission. Brother Michael and myself pulled together a list of elements essential to our Lasallian habitus. While not exclusive nor exhaustive, we feel these stand as pillars for engaging in theological reflection through our Lasallian perspective. Notice that some of these are personal and some are communal. The metaphors on the right appear in historical Lasallian texts, cited as enduring reference points in contemporary publications. Current expressions that expand our habitus include going to the peripheries and being leaven for the world. The connection between historically rich metaphors and current expressions displays the dynamic adaptation present in the Lasallian habitus. We as Lasallians, above many things, are flexible. We're able to adapt. We're able to read the signs of the times. For example, over decades, references to the children of the artisans and poor, language used in the time of the founder, has transformed into our current conversations about the peripheries. Now that we have explored some of the elements of theological reflection, we will delve into two models that hope to frame and drive us through this transformational process. Brother Michael, before I continue, anything to add?
Yes, I would. Brian made a mention of the touching hearts. And if you think of what the heart meant in the time of the founder, the place of decision making, the place where we are converted, the deepest sense of our identity, in a sense, that corresponds to a great deal with the habitus. That's what changes. That is what is transformed every time we grow and add something to our habitus. It's like that would be a perfect example.
Absolutely, thank you. Reading back up through some of these, Brother Robert Smith mentioning the incarnational theology, right, and our pastoral
Yes.
approach. Ryan mentioning the trusting in God's providence. That certainly comes through in the awareness, right, being aware. Also, a number of people mentioned the presence of God. And so that awareness, brother, that you were speaking about initially, is that access point, right? Recognizing that we're in the presence of God is becoming more aware of God in our lives, but also each of us in each other's lives and ourselves in the world. Erica, I love the use of the word atmosphere. It kind of very much permeates who we are. It becomes all around us, right? We never can really escape it. Not that we necessarily want to. And in Andy, certainly the older brothers, sisters, as students, I think that's something that we did not include, but that is very evident in De La Salle's writing, and the challenge and encouragement he really gave his early brothers and teachers, that you are to be brothers, older sisters to those in your care, in our care.
May I? Some other elements that I think are part of our habitus are, I'm not going to say with their knee-jerk, but second nature. For example, when we say together and by, people automatically fill that in. When we think of the spirit of the institute, and there are so many examples of the way our language has grown and developed around some of these Lasallian key ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
You're welcome, brother.
So as we look at these two models, I will take the first model, and then Brother Michael will take the second one. The first of these models approaches theological reflection through the lens of engaging theology in the vernacular of the local or regional culture. This model takes the position that culture is recognized as an essential element of connectivity and understanding, a way of forging deeper relationships with God, ourselves, and each other. These connections, in turn, are vital to discerning and moving toward practical action. So in order for us to work together, we need to be open to the diversity, to what is going on in our local context. From a scriptural place, one of the clearest examples of this model occurs in real time in the story of Pentecost. With Jesus's followers gathered, this would constitute, if we're looking at the Venn diagram, the human experience of community, the Holy Spirit, which would constitute the religious tradition or element descending, and offering humanity the gift of understanding, which would be the self, being able to see ourselves in the world amidst people, and being understood by others, as well as others understanding us through the speaking and comprehending of unfamiliar tongues. And again, this would be the multiple languages portion of the Pentecost story, coming through as culture. I'm going to read a short passage from the account of Pentecost that I think highlights this, from the Acts of the Apostles. Now there were devout Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it we hear, each of us, in our own native tongue?" In these verses, the desire, the search for meaning comes alive. Across language and dialect, those present understand each other, fully recognizing the breadth of cultural differences among them as well. Theological reflection in the vernacular encourages us to draw the varied aspects of cultural difference nearer to the center of the self, the center of ourself, in order to discern paths to action. The miracle of Pentecost, and I think a space in which it directly connects with theology in the vernacular, is that it is twofold. Yes, the presence of the Holy Spirit gifted those present with the ability to speak in tongues they did not understand. It also graced those present with the ability to hear in other languages, a miracle of the ears. Pentecost was a miracle of the tongue and a miracle of the ear. It's and engaging in theological reflection through the lens of the vernacular of the local culture requires both an ear to hear and a tongue to speak. We center the awareness of cultural diversity in this model of reflection, which offers us the opportunity to bring community to others and communities of others along the journey with us. So we are not just going it by ourselves as we reflect, as we come up with solutions to challenges, to various oppressions, various injustices. We are doing this as a community, but only through being able to hear and speak with each other. On the screen, there's a quote from Bevins and Schroeder. The work of theological reflection may be understood as more of a treasure hunt, seeking to bring to the surface signs of God's grace and activity already at work in our midst. When I first read this, I definitely resonated with it. And in reading, in thinking about approaching theology from a cultural standpoint, from a local cultural standpoint, The process of theological reflection certainly takes on the element of a treasure hunt. It's a slow unearthing of the diversity present in each of our everyday encounters and certainly within ourselves. As Lasallians, we encounter this form of theological reflection often, though not always under its traditional name. An example that I would pose to us each year in the Lasallian region of North America, the Huther Lasallian Conference brings together educators who seek to minister at the peripheries. That would fall into the category of culture, right? We've created this culture where we seek to go to the peripheries, to go to the margins. Drawing on the collective wisdom of those present, Huther offers the opportunity to connect and form community. This would be the part of the Venn diagram that is our human experience. We as humans long to form community with each other, with God, with those around us. And then animated by gospel values, Huther participants share in spiritual experiences, primarily through prayer and liturgy. And this would be the religious tradition. So taking our Catholic and Christian elements, combining them with elements from other faith traditions present in our Lasallian family. Together, and this is kind of bringing us to the center, to the self, the Huther community embarks on a unique continuing treasure hunt. We creatively discover and rediscover the beautiful diversity of our Lasallian charism and mission as we recognize and respond to the signs of our times.
Thank you, Michael. Very helpful. I'd like to talk a little bit about that's it. One of the models that emerges is a praxis model. And I remember when I was studying for my doctorate at CTU, we followed the praxis, which is that constant dialogue between what you do and then your reflection. But also it has strong elements from the liberation theology. As you know, liberation theology emerged, especially in Latin America. I will use that as an example after Second Vatican Council to see, okay, how do we make Vatican Council work here? And so if we return to this, you'll notice these, this is from the Latin American way of doing theology, see, judge, act. It is the basis of the foundation, at least, of the Vega movement. The first example we had in 2009 was based on the three words in Italian, see, judge, act. And what were people seeing in Latin America? They were seeing the church not always on the right side of a struggle against poverty and social justice. And so these theologians, among whom were, there are many of them, the Boff brothers, Clodovus Boff, Leonardo Boff, and who is referred to as the father of liberation theology, Gustavo Gutierrez. They started saying, what we see is this reality, and our judgment is that we're not doing enough, and that we need to, through political and civic engagement, we need to produce a society that pays more attention to the marginalized people, to people on the periphery, if you will. So if you notice, their scriptures of choice were the prophetic books, and the basic model of liberation is the Exodus. and the extent to which the Exodus mirrors the struggle of a people living in bondage to move to a new reality. It also uh, is, I think, famous because it refers to the theology of the people. They trusted people. They trusted people to read the scriptures and to understand the scriptures. It was very powerful in the movement of ecclesial-based communities. And when you think of how all of these different pieces came together to form a kind of a whole. No, I'm not going to pretend that it wasn't one of its issues. One of the big issues was the controversy of the social interpretation. They felt that these experts were interpreting society through a Marxist lens, and many people, they had their issues. It's also at a time when Latin America had a series of important meetings to help suss out what the implications of Vatican II might be. The first was in 68 in Puebla, called by the Conference of Latin American Bishops, and produced a great support for this style of involvement and participative engagement. The second one would have been in Medellin, called in 1978 by John Paul II. And again, concerns that were expressed. But I think the important thing that I think that this is, they trusted people, that people could be of resource. And so when we talk about, theological reflection, doing scriptures, imagining a different way of being, these theologians took the Latin American people seriously and said, yes, we can do this. We can. Now, it's true they did have to be careful of a certain style of interpretation, but I think it is moved on. Unfortunately, my recent reading, I've discovered that the meetings in Aparecida in Brazil have moved a little bit away from this movement. But anyway, it's just an example of how the emphasis in those three areas, if you think of the culture, you think of people's experience, and people's religious tradition, is extremely rich tapestry here. I think maybe I better be quiet because otherwise we won't be able to finish. Brother Michael?
Brother Michael, thank you. I do have a quick question for you. In thinking about theological reflection and thinking about a number of different models, can you speak briefly, perhaps, to the overlap of different models? I think the idea of theology in the vernacular and then the model of liberation and praxis, there are some overlaps there.
Yes.
So can you speak to that overlap?
Well, I think it's thank you for the question. And I think it's just a tribute to this enlivening, because I think people are coming alive with questions, and they're understanding that, especially if you look at the cultural piece, depending on if you're coming from Asia or if you're coming from the United States or you're coming from Latin America, the cultural piece is going to have a huge impact. The religious tradition might be also quite different. There'll be some coincidence, especially in those areas that presume that religious tradition is only scripture. The United States, for example, or Latin America, we have a much broader expansion of that. So I think the fact that you mentioned vernacular, each one of those areas, each one of those groups is going to express this or interrogate the tradition or the status quo from a different standpoint. And so I think, yeah, there is a lot of overlap. And there's a lot of some places where they don't overlap at all, and other places where they overlap a great deal. Think of a country that is all Roman Catholic or all Muslim or all whatever. Their difference between their culture and their religious tradition might be very small. In a place like the United States, where there's such a diversity, that's not the case. And so I think, I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. And thank you for kind of unpacking this second model. As Brother Michael mentioned early on, there are a number of models of theological reflection, and we have only touched on two here today. Toward the end of the presentation, there is some additional resources. We wanted to offer the audience a practical kind of, if we're talking about model and method, a practical method for us to engage with theological reflection. One of the most visible opportunities that I would say, and I think I can speak for Brother Michael, for us to engage in this process in our current Lasallian context is with the leavening movement. It's a call from the Institute and the Superior General that invites each of us to take into account our local context, discerning individually and collectively how we are being called to meet and minister to those with greatest need. Similarly, and I think we certainly see this in the liberation model, similar to theological reflection, the leavening movement asks us to seek the integration of our human experience, our religious tradition, and our cultural context. So really to bring the three of those together and ask, what are we being called to do? Who are we being called to serve and minister to as Lasallians? I appreciate with this process that above all, it is a reflective process. It's not just jumping into action. It's taking time to think about, to sit and listen and discuss with people, perhaps people who are very different than we are, about where to go next and how God is calling each of us to respond. There was a question early on about how to facilitate this process for high school students. And I think that is a challenge that, especially for us who are working directly with young people, it is a challenge that we face each day. How do we bring a theological backbone into our daily classroom work, whether we are theology teachers or not? We wanted to offer the opportunity to have each of you think about and reflect on where the intersection is between engaging in the process of theological reflection and how it can enhance our response to the leavening movement. How can theological reflection and engaging in this help us to move to the peripheries, to answer the call of the leavening movement? And at this point, I would invite us to take a few minutes. We don't have a whole lot of minutes left, but take a few minutes. And as you come up with ideas or even questions, to go ahead and drop those into the chat, and we will answer the questions and share the responses. So again, how can engaging in the process of theological reflection enhance our response, our ability to respond to the call, the challenge, the encouragement of the leavening movement. Talking about the see, judge, act method, right? That Brother Michael referred to. And then engaging with social engagement. So really having students interact with reflecting. Thank you, Brother Brian. Thinking about how to engage with this, how to utilize this tool with those we want to lift up, those we want to connect with. Again, not just serving them, but also dignifying their lives. Excellent question, David. Brother Michael, there's a question regarding in the second model, you referenced the political instability, right? And kind of where we are in the US context currently. And the question is, can I use the prophets in Exodus to create a leavening experience?
You want me to respond?
Yeah.
Okay. I promised myself I wasn't going to get into politics. But I think it is the elephant in the room. And I think I would, in any case, especially with young people, let them discover what they find in the text. Let them discover, for example, when you read some of the text from Isaiah, or when you read the text from, have the young people approach it not as an answer or as a direct, a parallel to what is happening, but as what is this invite them to? What attitudes does it awaken them? What attitudes does it require them in terms of their response? How might their response be? I don't know if any of you have read the recent book by Gregory Boyle, but he's talking about the role of tenderness in society, and especially with dealing with people who have had difficult lives. And so I think be very careful. This is me speaking. Be very careful about not trying to be careful to evoke ideas rather than suggest ideas. Have them trust, as the founder did, trust that they're not idiots, that they can figure things out, that they can see something, or that they might invite us to a deeper reflection that has never occurred to us.
On the screen are some additional resources that Brother Michael collected. We used the book that he is holding up to a great extent in preparing for this. And if you would like access to this PowerPoint, please feel free to reach out to either one of us. Our contact information is here on the screen. We're happy to answer any questions or dialogue further on this. Brother Michael, is there anything additional you'd like to add?
I would like to say that there are several, if are you interested in looking at the list of works we have made available, there are several of those that are kind of classics. It might be worthwhile to read some of those classics. I'm thinking particularly of the Whiteheads, because of their insistence on culture. And Kellen de Beer, that's one of them that we used when I was back in the Stone Ages when I was doing my doctoral work. That is also very important because of the attention paid to narrative. And I think this book, Theological Reflection Methods by 3 authors, are more contemporary essays into theological reflection, which might be helpful to kind of expand our horizons.
Great. Thank you, brother. Thank you all for participating and for your attention this evening. It has been an honor to be with you, to walk through theological reflection. Many blessings on each of you and your ministries. Chris, back to you.
Thank you, Brother Michael and Brother Michael, for your insights, reflection, and invitation in understanding theological reflection within our Lasallian spirituality in a rich way. We're grateful for you and grateful to all who joined tonight's webinar. As we look ahead, please mark your calendar for the next webinar in our series, Thursday, April 10th at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, as we'll be joined by Father Nate Wills on the topic of navigating the generative landscape in Catholic schools. If you have topics for future webinars and ideas, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And secondly, as we continue this year of Lasallian spirituality, Christian Brothers Conference will be hosting an Encountering Lasallian Spirituality retreat from February 3rd to 6th at the Bethany Retreat Center in Lutz, Florida. This gathering will take place in a retreat-style format, inspired by De La Salle's encouragement of the brothers to take time away from ministry for spiritual rest and renewal, providing participants with space for personal and communal reflection and formation. Information can be found on lasallian.info. Again, thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you for your dedication and service of our Lasallian charism and mission. Live Jesus in our hearts
Forever.
forever.